Hey there everyone, I hope you all are having a wonderful day. I'm a mess and, well... Okay, so in my Undead Unluck video, I dissed this manga called Akane-Banashi, and said I was not going to talk about it. But I had several people tell me to give it another chance, and that it's not a bad manga, it's actually really nice and exciting. But you see, the first chapter did something that I, as a reader, absolutely hate to see. The writer, Yuki Suenaga, did something in that very first chapter that genuinely irritated me, and the second chapter did nothing to remedy that. I was salty after reading that first chapter, hence me dissing it in the Undead Unluck review. But I may have jumped the gun. And the reason I did is because I read the first chapter the week it came out, and for the most part it appeared to be an exciting series. Nothing grand or spectacular, but a series I would have enjoyed reading on a weekly basis. That is until I had read the last bit of the chapter. I did read the second chapter just to see if it continued from the first, but instead of building off this major event that the author had established, there's a time skip. Granted, the major event wasn't treated as if it didn't play a role in the protagonist's development. It wasn't glossed over or anything like that, but to see how it affected the people in the long term rather than the immediate aftermath was very disheartening. So after that, I dropped the series. A few months went by and some of my friends started talking about it, and they were telling me it was a good series, but I was still a little annoyed with how it started. But they convinced me to give it another chance, and it wasn't anything mind-blowing or completely out there. But in chapter 27, I felt the story had finally come around in a full circle and remedied the events of the first chapter in a way that I actually found satisfying. Okay, so enough rambling. Let's start with the discussion. So to start, I'm going to discuss the premise and keep the story relatively spoiler-free. Then I will move on to a spoiler-filled section reviewing the events of the story and giving my thoughts on it. With all that being said, let's jump right into it. Akane-Banashi is a story about rakugo performances, which are like plays with a single person kneeling on a pillow or a mat, and they begin telling a story with minimal movements and no stage props besides maybe a fan. The series does explain how the performances work and a little information about the story that is being performed. The series is not wildly entertaining or exciting, but it's a nice and relaxing story to read. So it's for sure not boring, it's more of a heartwarming tale about a father and daughter bonding over rakugo. I personally think that it's a really good story to sit back and enjoy a nice cup of tea with while listening to some music. Even if you know absolutely nothing about rakugo or even have no interest in it, you can still enjoy this story. Another reason that you might enjoy this story is if you are a fan of One Piece and you are caught up to the manga, then you would know that the Wano arc just ended. Now, the Wano arc was supposed to be told in a rakugo style performance, hence each act ending with a curtain closing. And the arc ended with a person actually giving a rakugo performance to the citizens, telling them the events of Onigashima, and how the 9 red scabbards traveled through time to avenge the death of their lord Odin, and reinstated the Kozuki clan as the leading clan, and plays Momonosuke as the shogun. Akane-Banashi goes into more details about rakugo and helps you understand the storytelling style of Wano and what was intended of it. From this point onward, I'll be discussing the events of the series, which will have minor spoilers, which will include the events of the first chapter. So for those of you who want absolutely no spoilers, I'll just say this. Akane-Banashi has a really nice story. It's not the craziest or completely out there in terms of story development, but I can say this with absolute certainty. You will definitely enjoy reading this series. So now I'll start by discussing the events of the first chapter. The story begins with our protagonist Akane Osaki stating that she had always loved watching her dad practice rakugo from behind the sliding door. The story then proceeds to show us her father Shinta Arikawa's performance. There is a reason he has a different last name. I'll get into that a little later. So he's doing his performance and it's clear that he isn't doing too well. He's clearly nervous, but he's not struggling. He's going through his performance and he's getting a couple of laughs, but he wasn't on top of his game. And that is confirmed when the proprietor of the establishment tells what I believe is a reporter or maybe just some rando with a camera that this was nowhere near his best performance. He is so much more talented than his current gigs have shown. This story then moves on to Akane's school and we are introduced to Akane for the first time. She is currently in the counseling room being yelled at by another student's mom because she had gotten into a fight with her son. The other student had been making fun of Akane's dad and calling him a deadbeat. So Akane got mad and yelled at him. So the kid acted like she heard him and his mom tried to go off on Akane, but the teacher and Akane's dad stepped in and managed to calm her down at the end. Funny enough, Akane's dad did apologize for his daughter's behavior, but he managed to diss the woman in the end by saying they both have a long way to go to not be an embarrassment to their kids. Later that evening, when Shinta was practicing his routine, Akane was secretly watching him and even imitating his movements. She's also complimenting how well he is able to distinguish between each and every single character. She can instantly tell which character he's portraying, despite him playing 3 different people. We then move on to Shinta's promotion test. He's trying to become a Shinoichi, which is the highest rank for a rakugo performer, and Shinta is feeling the pressure. His palms are sweaty, his knees are weak, his arms are heavy. There's vomit on the sweater already. Mom, spaghetti. Okay, that's all I'm doing. But seriously, Shinta's starting to doubt himself. He's scared that he'll be called a deadbeat again. His wife will be under even more pressure to take care of them. And worst of all, he's scared that his own daughter will give up on him. However, unbeknownst to him, his wife and daughter are his biggest supporters. Even if he fails over and over again, they would have never given up on him. By the time he went up on that stage, he was terrified, and it clearly showed. He tried making some jokes as his opener about how his career was in the hands of the judges and audience. So he kind of felt like a politician in that sense. However, the head judge apparently didn't like his opening joke at all. He was clearly annoyed, and that caused Shinta to freak out even more. Then someone in the audience started sneezing. Shinta instantly realized that it was his daughter Akane. We then receive a short flashback to when Shinta's wife first told him about how Akane was imitating him, and that she idolizes him. So it was okay for him to whine around her, but in front of Akane, he needs to be the awesome father she knows him to be. He then went straight into his performance. He began telling the story of Shibahama, which is about a drunk fisherman who has a tremendous amount of depth. One day, while walking on the beach of Shiba, he finds a pouch full of coins. He ran back into his house and celebrated by drinking until he passed out. While he was unconscious, his wife ends up taking the coin pouch to a government office and tells her husband he dreamt the whole thing. She then convinces him to get serious about work before he drinks himself to death. Moved by his wife's elegant and kind words, he gives up drinking and begins moving his life in the right direction. 3 years later, the government office returned the coin pouch because no one had claimed it. She apologizes to her husband about lying to him, fully expecting him to be angry with her, but instead he thanked her, because if she had never done that, he probably would have wasted that money and threw away his life. Shinta had made some alterations to the original performance. In the original, when the husband goes out to the beach, the scenery is supposed to be described as a beautiful and sunny morning. It's apparently one of the most important parts of Shibahama. However, Shinta chose to skip over that part and jump straight into the dialogue between the husband and wife. He did this so he could wow the audience with his strongest trait as a rakugo, and that is his acting. He brilliantly drew in the audience with his impersonations and blew them away with his performance, drawing a loud and roaring applause from the audience. However, it should be noted that some of the judges were annoyed that he skipped over the description of the scenery. Despite that, the audience was left captivated at the end of his performance. Then the head judge, Isho Arakawa, which by the way, I don't think he's related to Shinta, I think it's because they are in the Arakawa school of Rakugo that everyone who is a part of the school has Arakawa as his family name, seeing how Akane's family name is Osaki. So Isho Arakawa walks on stage, about to give his verdict on the students who had just performed. His words will decide everyone's future. And the moment he stepped on stage, he announced that every single student that had performed that day were henceforth expelled from the school and no longer allowed to perform Rakugo. When Shinta's master went to defend his student, Isho simply told him that he did him a favor, and that whatever he performed on stage was not Shibahama. Just to remind you, this is still the first chapter. Granted, it was a little less than 50 pages long, but it was still the introduction to the story. You can see where I have a problem. The story gave us no time with Shinta. They introduced him and then killed him off to jump straight into Akane's story respectfully. Instead of the author just failing Shinta and then watching him continue to struggle until his inevitable expulsion, we skip straight to killing him off, metaphorically of course, because he's still alive, even though we no longer get him in the presence of the story. The only time we see him from that point onward is in flashbacks. Like when he's being told Akane is going to be studying Rakugo. We see that he is fully supportive of it. Well, we don't actually see his face, which is part of the whole metaphorical death. He's pretty much out of the story the moment he was brought into it, just to speed up the protagonist's development. I personally don't like when authors do that. It's one thing to introduce a character to kill them off later to develop the protagonist, but to do it as soon as the story starts just ended up ticking me off. No disrespect intended towards the writer Yuki Suenaga, especially since it was made apparent that Shinta was going to fail with the very first page of the series, and also the fact that his daughter Akane is on the cover and in the title of the series. But I would have liked for him to have a little more screen time to showcase the struggle of becoming a Rakugo, and also to develop his relationship with his daughter a little more. Now, to finish off the first chapter, we get a time skip to when Akane is a teenager, and she's walking to a building with a sign saying Isho Arakawa is performing there. We don't see her go inside, but we know that she went to see his performance. Now that you understand why I was annoyed by this series at first, allow me to present you why I think it's still worth it to go back and give this series a second chance. This will be a heavy spoiler-filled section going over some key events for the next 20-something chapters. I won't be going over the series in its entirety, but I will be talking about some of the major scenes that made this series as enjoyable as it turned out to be. So I do recommend going and reading the rest on your own, so you could all grow more attached to the characters. Cause honestly, that is where the series shines. It makes you root for the character you are following, even though they kill one of them off respectfully. Okay, so to start off, the rest of the series follows Akane as she studies under her father's former master, Shiguma Arakawa. She isn't one of his pupils yet, but he gives her advice and teaches her the fundamentals of Rakugo. And this has been going on since her father was expelled 6 years ago. She became a decent rakugo performer, and because she had displayed such excellent skills, Shiguma gives her the offer to become one of his pupils after she graduates from high school. She then went with him to the dorms his pupils stay at, and she started receiving lessons from them. She slowly learns how to not only give off a stupendous performance, but also how to adapt her performance to fit the desires of her current audience. Now, there were some bumps in the road, one of which being her teacher didn't approve of her dedicating her life to being a rakugo performer. But after seeing Akane perform, he decided to accept her career path and gave her a flyer for an amateur competition. She ended up competing in the amateur tournament, where the winner will get a one-on-one meeting with the Issho Arakawa, the man who had expelled her father 6 years ago. This is where we meet two potential rival characters. There is a man by the name of Kadashi Neriyama who is a natural talent and one of the favorites to win the tournament, seeing as how he had won the previous 2 years. The other is a popular voice actress named Hikaru Koragi who's trying to showcase that she has a wide variety of acting skills in order for her to get even more job opportunities. During the tournament, both of them gave incredible performances that left the crowd excited and entranced. So the fact that Akane went on after them posed a serious disadvantage. The crowd was all tapped out after the 2 previous stellar performances. And to make things worse, Akane was limited to only perform a story called Jugemu, which is a comedy story about a kid with a really long name. It's a very common and well-known rakugo story that is difficult to make entertaining, especially since Akane had to perform it multiple times for the tournament. This disadvantage was placed on her by Shiguma because he had believed that she had received more than enough training to win this tournament even with that disadvantage. And he was correct in assuming that, because Akane came out fully prepared and ended up putting on a calming performance to soothe the overexcited audience. It was a performance that was well thought out and performed to such an incredible degree that even the other contestants were complimenting it. They even stated that it felt like Akane was disappearing and the world of Jugemu was enveloping the stage. However, her performance was too good. Issho quickly realized that she was training under Shiguma. This was not a good thing because Issho doesn't like Shiguma. We don't know why. All we know is that the two of them don't get along, and that was even before the expulsion event. Also, at the end of each performance, Issho will give his thoughts on the rakugo, and when Akane finished her performance, he only said one thing, and that was, "You know you don't belong here, right?" Akane instantly agreed with him. The meaning of that sentence became more apparent in the following pages when Akane won the tournament. So for context, this was a tournament for amateur rakugo performers, and the fact that Issho was praising and giving high remarks to other performers, and Akane was the only one he said doesn't belong there, means he doesn't view her as an amateur, and the other 2 contestants instantly knew the meaning behind his comment. Even before Akane had won the tournament, it meant they were still amateurs. They did, however, impress some of the other judges enough for them to approach them. I don't know if they offered to take them on as apprentices, but it does seem like they will. Anyways, Akane ended up getting her interview with Issho, and there she finally got the chance to ask the question she's been dying to ask for the past 6 years. Why did he expel her father? This is where I think the author redeems himself, because the events of the first chapter come back around in chapter 27. We finally get Issho's reasoning for the expulsion, and he asks Akane what she thought of her dad's performance. She believed that it was a performance worthy of the title Shinuichi. Issho merely looked at her and asked that if the woman sitting there right now truly believes that without any doubt in her mind. In that moment, she remembered how her dad got off to a rocky start because he was nervous, and that had made everyone want to support him. And in the end, he got a huge round of applause. Now, I really love Issho's response to this. He asks her, is it the audience applause that makes it a performance worthy of a Shinuichi? Or is it the rakugo performance itself? If the audience is applauding the performer because he was nervous and they wanted to support him, instead of because his performance was so outstanding that it moved them to applaud, then the applause don't mean a thing. Someone who receives applause out of pity instead of skill did not deserve the title of Shinuichi. It would have made rakugo more niche than it already was. Issho's goal is to push rakugo to a young mainstream audience, and he can't do that if the highest ranking rakugos were not skilled and flawless performers. If a rakugo was not confident enough to believe in his own art, he did not deserve to stand at the peak of said art. After Akane heard this, she was relieved to hear that Issho had a reason for expelling her father and resolved to back it up. If he had expelled her dad on a whim or a selfish reason, she would not have forgiven him. But most of all, she was happy that she still believed in her dad's art, and she was going to use that art to climb the ranks and make Issho admit he was wrong about her dad's style and that he was worthy of the title Shinuichi. So I was glad to see that Issho's reasoning for the expulsion wasn't something stupid like rakugo needs to stick to its strict traditional standards and altering the art was something he could never forgive. Also, I kind of like the message this instills, and that is to believe in what you do. If you have doubts about your work or art or hobby, you will never improve or succeed. Success is born from faith and hard work. You lack one in achieving your goal will seem like a pipe dream. Also, when I first started reading this manga, I thought it could go for about 100 chapters. Then the end of the first chapter made me think that this was going to be a short series lasting about 30 to 40 chapters. But after reading chapter 27 and 28, I started thinking that maybe the author could push this past 100 chapters. If he shows the struggle of being a rakugo through Akane's eyes and having her dad become her biggest supporter, instead of vice versa like I had assumed the series would start out as. So this is why I'm looking past the rush start. I still don't like it when authors introduce a character only to kill them off, but there are some series that I have forgiven for doing that. Demon Slayer being one, and now Akane-Banashi. I'm really looking forward to seeing where the story goes from here. And with that, I'd like to thank you all so much for watching. I truly appreciate it. I look forward to seeing you in the next one, and remember to keep having fun. See ya!